We've spoken about freedom of speech before, and particularly relating to the case of Pastor Olawale Ilasami, who was arrested in Enfield, and you've written to me about that. Obviously, he was arrested and de-arrested, and the police have made compensation. But that was a high-profile case, but there's been another high-profile case in November at Speaker's Corner, and you may be aware of the case of Roland Parsons, another Christian street preacher who has been attending Speaker's Corner for about 20 years, peacefully saying what he has to say and putting up a sign to back up what he wants to say. And on the 10th of November, the police asked him to take down a sign which said the blood of Christ. He's had that sign up for many, many years, but suddenly, after 20 years, the police targeted him, asked for his name and address, and asked him to remove that sign. I don't know why that was. I don't know why the people in Speaker's Corner who were policing that did that, but what are your thoughts on that? Should that have happened, and was that reasonable and proportionate?
Well, Chair, I'm not aware of the full details of that case. What I can do is look into it and write to the Assembly member in relation to what I can ascertain from the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime and the MPS. I've been quite clear in my answer. I think Article 10 in the Human Rights Act is quite clear in relation to freedom of expression, freedom of speech. There is obviously nuances involved in relation to the job of the police to make sure nobody's breaking the law. I don't know about the individual circumstances of the case, and so I look into the case and write to the Assembly member. I'm quite clear. One of the joys of living in a democracy is freedom of speech, having that debate, that discussion, sometimes heated, hopefully always courteous, and I think that's quite important in a democracy. We should cherish that.
Well, thank you for your answer. I appreciate you don't know the details of that specific case, as you say, but it just seems to me that one person who's been there for 20 years suddenly is asked to take down a sign when other people who had signs weren't asked to take that down. So I appreciate you going to write to me about that.
What I'd say, Chair, is I'm grateful for the Assembly member who raised a previous case, rightly so, and he'll be aware the case was raised. Police looked into it. I think the officers apologised, and actually, I think the police accepted that particular person, it was wrong for the police to arrest and do what they did, which demonstrates, hopefully, that the system of checks and balances works. I'm not for one saying that police always get it right. It's just really difficult. They often make split-second decisions. Complaints are made, but by and large, I genuinely believe we've got the best police service in the world. They understand the challenges, and so let me look into it, Chair, and I'll write back to the Assembly member.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor. But I want to raise another case which has also been quite high profile and has received a lot of media attention, and that's the case of Christian Hacking. He was another Christian. He prayed, engaged in prayer outside the abortion clinic in Ealing, where there is a so-called buffer zone, a public space protection order, which you supported 100% in the setting up of this buffer zone. But when it was written, it went well beyond sort of banning people speaking to actually banning and criminalising prayer. It's astounding that there's an area of London where prayer is now a criminal activity. And Christian Hacking was a person, he was arrested by the police. Apparently the procedure wasn't implemented properly. And then the case was dropped by the police. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Should prayer be criminalised?
Well, I think, Joe, we've got to be very careful in attributing as established facts to a situation where the facts may not be established. What I'm clear about is often vulnerable women who, in my view, should have the right to choose what happens to their body are being harassed by individuals and groups across our city. I don't want an Americanisation in relation to what's happened to the right of women to choose what happens to their body. And if it is the case, there is a buffer zone with quite clear rules that are being breached by anybody. I think it's right that the police should enforce a breach of the buffer zone rules. I don't know about the facts of the case, and as somebody who himself prays, I find it objectionable if somebody else was not allowed to pray or is criminalised. That's not saying anything about the facts of that case, which I just don't know about, but I think it would be quite clear there was a very good reason and a very sensible reason why the council supported those women and others in relation to this buffer zone. And you're right, I fully support this buffer zone outside this clinic.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I do have a problem with you using the word harassment, because groups that are pro-life, who have been protesting there for nearly 25 years before the buffer zone was put into place, there's never been a single case of harassment, abuse or intimidation being brought, even though people have accused pro-life groups such as the Good Counsel and others of doing so. There was never any evidence that they engaged in harassment.
Well, I think
and suddenly, you know, this public space protection order has brought this in. And now I feel that it's a very, very draconian erosion of freedom of speech that is taking place in Ealing and other places.
Look, Chair, one of the joys of our democracy is we're entitled to disagree. I would say this: one of the checks and balances we have is, before the order was issued, the courts looked at those sorts of arguments. But similarly, if the Assembly member believes, or the individual believes, that his rights have been breached, he can challenge that through the courts, which again is one of the great things about living in a democracy. So look, without knowing the facts of the case, if that individual or the Assembly member thinks they've been wronged, then it's open to them obviously to challenge this with the courts.
Well, I would appreciate if you could look into that case, because I mean, the arrest was actually wrongful. I mean, he was not given a caution before he was arrested, as far as I can see by looking into the facts of the case. So if you would look into that and ensure that the police follow proper procedures.
Chair, why don't I agree to look in both those cases raised by the Assembly member? But if there's any more facts, feel free to just email my office and I'll be happy to look into those.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.